Hey guys, I'm going to do a little different video here. You're going to be reading a bunch of Federalist Papers this year, and I don't know how well the context is given by Edgenuity, so I wanted to just kind of recap, what the Federalist Papers were, how they came about, what their purpose was, because that impacts a lot of how you understand the document and what it was trying to do. So I'm just going to walk you through here, what brought about the Federalist Papers. The Federalist Papers exist because the Constitution required ratification. That was what Article 7 was all about. It's the rules of adoption. The Constitution needed to convince 9 of the 13 states to adopt it in order for it to go into effect. So as far as the rules of ratification go, 9 of the 13 states needed to ratify it. Here in the background you can see a little bit of colonial era propaganda as a political cartoon talking about the key states that needed to ratify. And as you can see, the pillar for Virginia and the pillar for New York are the most important ones, and that's because Virginia was the wealthiest state, it was the physically largest state, and it sits right at the axis of the 13 states. It's halfway up the Atlantic coast. It's right in the middle. And you got to remember, Virginia at this time included all the lands that we currently call West Virginia and Kentucky. So it stretched from the Atlantic Ocean all the way to the Mississippi River. It's, lush valleys, mineral-rich mountains, unexplored territories. It's the California of its time. If Virginia doesn't abide by the Constitution, no one else will. Even if you get 9 states, if you don't have Virginia, it doesn't happen. Same with New York. New York is the mercantile center of the New World. Goods from all around the world are brought into the New York harbor. What makes New York the thriving metropolis it is today are the very same things that made New York City the thriving metropolis it was in the 18th century. So all the rules are still the same. It's just the scale has drastically increased. And New York City very much controlled the politics of the state of New York, just like today New York City controls the politics of the state of New York. So without those 2 states agreeing to ratification, the Constitution will fail. Even though 9 states say, yeah, we're good with the Constitution. Delaware likes to claim they're the first American state, not because they were settled at any particular time, but because they were the ones who ratified the Constitution first. Woo! This is the most important thing Delaware ever did besides being a tax haven for credit card companies. That's their accomplishment. I believe, remember when they issued the 50 states quarters? That's what Delaware put on their quarter. It says Delaware, the first state. It's literally their only claim to fame. So the other states, yes, it's important that you get 9 to ratify, but it's very important which 9 are the ones ratifying it. And if it's not New York and Virginia, everyone else is going to back out. So ratification then breaks into 2 camps. You have the camps represented by the Federalists, who are supporters of the Constitution. They are nationalists. They don't all see eye to eye all the time, but they all agree that the new country won't survive very long unless they get a more stable system of government in place. And after all the debating at the Constitutional Convention, this is the best thing that they're going to be able to create. Everyone already kind of decided this is as much as they're willing to put into it. They want a strong central government, but they know it needs to be balanced with very clear limitations, and that's what Federalist 51 is really all about laying out, is yes, it's a strong central government, but it's strong in that it will be stable, not strong in that it will come to dominate every aspect of your life. They say states can write their own Bill of Rights because states are still going to be the preeminent policy-making entities initially. That was the intent of the Constitution, was that the states are still going to be far more active and dynamic than the national government because they have a lot more ability to make law. So the key 3 Federalists, and the ones who come to be the authors of what we know as the Federalist Papers, are Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay. John Jay is the third wheel of the Federalist troop. He only writes a couple of the essays. Madison and Hamilton take the brunt of writing all of them for the most part. So the goal of the Federalist Papers was to convince the members of the ratification delegations in New York and Virginia to adopt the Constitution. And New York really becomes kind of the linchpin state here because Virginia has a lot of very supportive founding fathers. Virginia calls itself the mother of presidents. They got George Washington, James Madison, Monroe, Jefferson. They have the A team of presidents come from Virginia, and so they know they're going to get the backing that they need to get it through the Virginia legislature. New York, though, is a little bit more dicey. The politics in New York have always been very dicey and personal. So it becomes the state where really that's where all the effort's going to end up being exerted. So there end up being 85 essays. Each one is about a different aspect of the Constitution, and typically it's addressing a specific complaint that enemies of the Constitution have put forward, saying that the Constitution is too powerful, the Constitution is too broad, the Constitution doesn't have enough specific limits in it. And so there are Federalist Papers that basically try to answer each one of these questions. They're a sales pitch. They are not written dispassionately. They are not written from a neutral point of view or a moderate point of view. They are written, especially the ones by Alexander Hamilton, to be persuasive essays. They have a viewpoint, and they're trying to convince you of the viewpoint. Madison is a little bit more gentle with his persuasion. He knows he's talking to an audience that doesn't agree with him, and so he's very careful to kind of slowly bring them along. You see that in Federalist 51, which is a Madison paper. Hamilton's a little more aggressive. He's very much the kind of person who will tell you you're stupid for not agreeing with him, and then he'll show you all the reasons why, which technically he might be factually correct, but everybody knows it's easier to lead somebody to a conclusion than to beat them over the head with that conclusion. So there is a group of anti-federalists that are not nearly as organized as the Federalists. They would be what we would consider, supporters of states' rights, that the states should be the preeminent governing bodies and that the national government should remain weak. They acknowledged that the Articles of Confederation were problematic, but they felt like the best course was to fix the Articles of Confederation, not to create this much more powerful government. So there are still very notable founding fathers amongst the Anti-Federalists. They might have lost the debate here, but it doesn't mean that they didn't have equally as impressive figures leading them. People like Patrick Henry, Samuel Adams, George Mason, they were all, predominant Anti-Federalists. And even though Jefferson is on the side of ratification, Jefferson isn't in the United States when the Constitution's being ratified. He's just kind of corresponding with people and saying, hey, hope it goes well. And when Jefferson does come back, Jefferson's whole political career is basically built around a lot of the principles of the Anti-Federalists when he inevitably starts to seek higher office once he's back in the United States. The Constitution, the big issue the Anti-Federalists have is there aren't a specific list of limits on what the national government can do to individuals. And that was a big concern for them. If you read through the text of the Constitution, there are only 3 specific things it says the federal government can't do to people. The first is they can't suspend what's called the writ of habeas corpus. Habeas corpus actually predates the Constitution. It's a legal principle that people who are being charged with crimes ought to be brought before a judge and told the crime they're charged with. You cannot be arrested and held in prison indefinitely without being told why you've been arrested and put on trial for that transgression. So that's what the writ of habeas corpus states, and so the Constitution says you can't suspend that. It prohibits laws ex post facto, which is Latin for after the fact. You can't pass a law in the past. Laws have to have a definitive starting date, and it has to be either when the law is passed or sometime in the near future. Sometimes Congress will pass laws where, they passed it in 2010, but it doesn't go into effect until 2014 because they know it takes time to build out the mechanisms to enforce that law. Ex post facto says you can't pass a bill in 2020 and have it go into effect in 2015 because you don't own a time machine. And so laws can only go into effect from the moment they are passed forward. You can't prosecute people for breaking a law before it was actually the law. And then lastly, it prohibits bills of attainder, which would be Congress passing a law that singles you out for some sort of punishment. Like they're passing a law to arrest and imprison you. That's not something that Congress can do. That's not something that they have the legal authority to do. Only the justice system can render those kinds of decisions. So Congress is prohibited from doing things like that. So the key compromise that ends up getting the Constitution passed is after the Constitution is adopted, there's a gentleman's agreement to create a Bill of Rights. And the Bill of Rights is passed by the first Congress. James Madison drafted about 13 or 14 specific amendments to the Constitution. 10 of them are popular enough to actually be ratified, and that's what we consider the Bill of Rights. They're kind of the, American governmental 10 Commandments. They are, the first 10 changes made to the Constitution, and a lot of them are specific limits on what the government can do and how it interacts with individuals. So I hope that gives you some context on, who the Federalists were, why they were writing these essays. They're trying to win over people who are on the fence. They're trying to get delegates to approve the Constitution so it goes into effect. So the next video I post will be about Federalist 51 specifically, and I'll go over the questions from that assignment, but I thought this would help kind of give some context.